This is a podcast about rejecting tyranny and oppression by cultivating both systemic and individual change. I believe the only way to create this kind of monumental change is to inspire understanding, love, and kindness. From there, we can work to embody these essential values in our cultural systems and in our individual lives. My hope is that by effectively communicating with anyone and everyone, we can establish a shared vision for humanity and explore new ways of living to build a better world for all of us. I'm your host, Nathan Jones, and this is the Kindness Rebellion. Dimitri, thank you so much for coming onto the Kindness Rebellion. I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to come into your home and talk about psychedelics and plant medicine and entheogenic substances. I really appreciate the opportunity.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me on the show.
Of course. So I'd love to kind of just get started by having you introduce both yourself as well as the Decriminalize Nature movement, just so that we can kind of get an understanding of your background and everything like that. And then I'm also really interested to jumpstart the conversation by understanding the difference between decriminalizing a substance versus legalizing a substance.
Sure. So a little bit about myself and the organization, right? Which one should I start with?
Oh, go ahead.
Whichever.
Yeah.
Myself personally, I don't know where to begin. I mean, I had a normal childhood, right? Like I grew up here in Utah, just outside of Salt Lake City. I was raised LDS, and then as I kind of fell out of the church and found my own faith, like I started working with plant medicine, psychedelics. I think the first time that I ingested psychedelic mushrooms, I was 15.
Wow.
And yeah, I mean, kind of just from there, like the relationship with plants and medicine, fungi grew. And as I personally kind of went through my own existential crises, like growing up as an individual, falling away from the church, kind of being the black sheep of the family. I'd say about the age of 24, I found myself down in the heart of Colombia, working with ayahuasca and finding my way into that space and becoming initiated to formally facilitate and pour the medicine for others. Wow. It was really kind of a fascinating experience, very serendipitous. Kind of like people talk about having their awakenings, and that was kind of one of those things for me. I had been asking for a lot of guidance in my life and been, looking for a purpose and my purpose, I guess, in life. And I think that's something that's, a lot of people call that a vocation.
Yeah.
Finding my vocation, I found it in the heart of Colombia, like working with ayahuasca and receiving the messages, the lessons, the channelings, like whatever it is that you ascribe to as an individual, and started really listening to myself and to the plants and to, I think, that intuitive guidance that comes from deepening ourselves into meditation and relationship with the self. And as time went on and I found myself, furthering my initiation into plant medicine and to ayahuasca specifically. It was around 2019 that Decriminalize Nature as an organization being located in Oakland. So they were Decriminalize Nature Oakland at the time. They had decriminalized like all plant medicines, being entheogenic plant medicines, including DMT containing plants, grasses, and like other DMT containing barks like mimosa and all, like anything that contained DMT, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, wow,
Yeah.
Shocked that had even happened because, for living in an underground world for almost half my life, right? Like I started working with plant medicine, like I would say around the age of 15 when I had my first, psychedelic entheogenic experience with mushrooms. And then, always kind of being seen or having that be seen as something on the fringe or taboo or like illegal,
like delinquent,
like
that.
So seeing that had happened, I was shocked, just like, wow, like this is happening. Like my deepest, darkest dreams, most wonderful, filled dreams of life and purpose in life started coming to reality, and There's pieces of this that I could talk about being serendipitous, and watching the universe like manifest my reality for
Mm-hmm.
me. And people talk about the law of attraction and the
Yeah.
secret and all these things. And, I had gotten into, my own awakening and experience as an individual and understanding, um, like reality creation as being something that is based in frequency, and it's based in understanding and awareness
Mm-hmm.
of self. And so like, and then we see and hear about like these sages and these monks that talk about the universe or the exterior is just like a reflection of your inner world and
Mm-hmm.
all these things. And it really became apparent to me that there were some things that were shifting in the world. And that's when, like I said, that when DNO initially had their decrim resolution pass, it was pretty apparent to me that the organization had some things figured out
Mm.
when it comes down to speaking with elected officials, or doing what I would consider to be the work,
Mm-hmm.
like the great work surrounding these plants and these medicines, and creating education and access, framework for elected officials to start to educate themselves surrounding, the difference between decriminalization and legalization,
Yeah,
and so
and
like,
and what is that difference? Because I think that's a very important part for people to understand. Because anytime I try to talk about decriminalization efforts, most people are like, yeah, well, they will decriminalize all drugs, or they make legalize all drugs in like Oregon, or even just they don't fully understand the decriminalize initiative. So, what is that distinction there?
yeah. So I mean, like overall, I mean, the distinction, just kind of briefly is, um, like decriminalization is basically, I'll give it to you in the form of a metaphor. Um, we're driving down I-15,
Mm-hmm.
right? We both have mushrooms in our pockets,
As we do.
right? And say like it's legalized,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you have a card or a prescription that gives you permission to have that, substance or those things on your person,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't have that recommendation.
Mm-hmm.
We get pulled over, cop searches us, say all that's like legal and prosperous and right. I go to jail. You don't.
Oh,
That's legality. That's legalization. Because I
interesting.
don't because I don't have a card. I don't have the recommendation.
Mm.
Now, decriminalization, right? Like flat out blatant decriminalization is like treating it like apples and oranges. It's like
Mm-hmm.
treating it like tomatoes,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like I can go grow it in my garden, and I don't have to worry about the DEA breaking down my door, or
Mm.
a state like, enforced task force, drug task force that, comes in and decides or determines that the substance that I have is illegal based upon, the Controlled Substance Act, which
Mm-hmm.
is, surrounding efficacy for medical, viability.
Mm-hmm.
So decriminalization is more based in surrounding what I would consider to be like a, spiritual indigenous cultural basis.
Mm.
Think about it, like when we were like before all of the bureaucratic red tape and late stage capitalism
Yes.
came into our world. Um, for instance, like most of the indigenous cultures of the world, they don't have a monetary system,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like they don't operate from like a monetary perspective of like capitalism or anything like that. They live
Yeah.
in harmony with the earth.
Mm.
And this is a lot of what, plants have taught me and fungi have taught me about living in harmony with the earth. But that's the thing, is that when we start to bring these plants and these fungi, these medicines, cacti into Western civilization, and we have uneducated individuals who don't understand the relationships that have been shared with these plants for thousands and thousands of years,
Mm.
we start to look at, instances like Oregon. We start to
Yeah.
see these clinical therapeutic models that get created without upfront decriminalization in lockstep surrounding community-based access, and treating it as such, right?
Yeah.
So there are a few different models that seem to be arising in the United States, and we can dip into that, as the conversation expands and things. But in reality, yeah, like the difference between decriminalization and legalization is very important to understand, as part of the narrative, and as an individual coming into this space, depending on what side of the fence you're on, and that fence being, the definition for the self between medical, clinical, therapeutic models. If one person or a person believes that the only people who should have access to this, should have to go through like a doctor's recommendation,
Yeah.
should have to go through like a state-run program to get access and pay a fee. Like that paying a fee is really important to kind of pay attention to, because that again is late-stage capitalism.
I am really happy that you brought this up, because I actually did want to kind of talk to you about that, because I have sort of seen that decriminalization efforts seem to be more about, okay, let's stop funding police action. Let's stop funding militant action against certain substances and certain things. And it's time to just like allow people to access it on their own. And then it frees up that space for that communal action, like you're saying, because really what I've seen, especially, I'm pretty sure it's been like in California, Oregon, that West Coast area, anytime, a substance is fully legalized, it really means that it's being commodified and commercialized, right? It's really just opening it up to powerful and well-funded interests. Pharmaceutical companies, exactly.
Venture capital.
To treat it as just some other thing to be making profit off of. And I think what's so important about psychedelic substances specifically is that it's not really supposed to be in any way, shape, or form a profitable venture, at least in terms of like economic profit and this sort of monetary system that you're referring to. Because I really see it as more of a personal experience and a personal awakening, and something that's just meant to be that everybody needs to have access to in order to awaken themselves and unlock their full potential.
Yeah, I mean, like a few things, like Terrence McKenna said that psychedelics will never be institutionalized, right? Just as starting off, like, it's being like such a
it
wise
dissolves
teacher.
It dissolves institutions.
Yeah, like it dissolves cultural barriers and some of the foundations that I believe that people operate on, and to kind of help them cleanse and renew their paradigms and their lenses. But a couple of the other things that you mentioned, it seems like like the commodification of these plants and these medicines comes from it stems into a lot of different aspects of the psyche, and kind of like what you mentioned is, like it seems that I would have to be like buying my soul back almost from an individual to have my healing, right?
That's like exactly what it is.
Exactly what it is, right? Because of the nature of these experiences, they're so illuminating and mysterious, and what I would, deeply profound, like mystical, and I mean, if we go back into some of the, how to say this, like the histories, like the history books, like, and look at Eleusis, right? Like, I don't know if you're familiar with what Eleusis was or
I'm
is.
not actually.
Like the foundations and experiences or mysteries of Eleusis were, like, how to say this, like paramount in some of the most growth that we've seen in philosophy. Like, I mean, Marcus Aurelius had his initial experiences at like in Eleusis, being like a place where he eventually derived meditations out of, like the book Meditations, right? Okay. Like the writings Meditation that Marcus Aurelius wrote as being, proems or, like pieces of like contemplation, right? Like, it's a really fascinating, concept when we start to understand like how these medicines were stripped out of our societies and why they were stripped out of our societies.
Yeah.
And now kind of where we're coming from is being, a community that has awakened themselves, that has, fallen or sprung into action, from that awakening. And recognizing also, the importance of protecting equitable, safe, sustainable access for all communities, not just the rich and wealthy and the prosperous or the people who have life and health insurance. I mean, sure, I can go get Obamacare, but
Yeah.
I don't know if Obamacare is going to pay for me to have that experience, because like then we have like 5 to 10 years of red tape, bureaucratic red tape, where the lobbyists and the senators, and they have to go through and they have to talk about it, and then there's the committees and there's all the things, and then it becomes never what we want it to be.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And really just in the, I think the reality of it is that when we decriminalize these plants and these medicines, what we're doing is we're empowering pathways of education. We're empowering pathways and framework for equitable, safe, sustainable access that doesn't commodify, that doesn't look like extractive-based capitalism or late-stage capitalism, and looking at the how to say this, like the sovereignty that we find, especially deeply inside of these medicines, right? Like they're
Yes.
so liberating from the past and from our traumas, our woundings, and honestly, I would debate or argue, however you want to say that that is the purpose of these medicines.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Like it is like they are there to assist us with the deeper spiritual healing that comes from from having trauma, from experiencing generational trauma that's passed on from our lineages and our birth and our parents. And I mean, our parents did the best that they could.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
That makes sense. I really love that you brought that up. And I think this is something we should really dive into, because I think most people, when they think about psychedelic plants and substances, they're often thinking of it as a party drug or some sort of just like a recreational use, which, I mean, I suppose people can use it that way, but what I love about decriminalized nature is the focus on its healing aspects, on the value of it as a medicine.
One thing I think is important here to kind of delineate for our listeners is that, there is a difference between psychedelics and entheogens. Decriminalized nature, I would say, advocates for more plant-based entheogens, right? Like natural medicines that come from the earth that don't require extensive alteration or synthesis.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I think anybody could argue that everything is natural.
Yeah.
I mean, Dennis McKenna, and he says that everything is drugs. I agree with that statement.
Yeah.
Right? But when we really start to look at how to like the synthesis or how some of these molecular chemical drugs more like isolated, manufactured, yeah. I mean, but they require they leave room for corruption, right? Like there could be somebody who missteps, or I mean, for instance, like LSD. There is a vast reporting of people that received NBOME versus LSD. And NBOM is what they're called. Completely different substance. A lot of people would, who are of the lower caliber black market drug dealer kind of, who doesn't care about your well-being.
Yeah.
They'll purchase NBOME knowingly and then sell it as LSD, and like those types of things can cause real harm.
Yeah.
Like LSD, it has been argued that it is one of the safest like molecules on the face of the planet for the human body to intake, like non-toxic.
Yeah.
Right. What's that say for like the mental aspect, like emotional aspect?
Yeah.
Like lots of different things, like lots of things can happen in that space. But as far as like, like physically like toxic to the body, like absolutely non-toxic. Right. But the after effects of like an NBOM, like NBUME, can cause like Bell's palsy type, right? Like reactions in some people's, where like like half their face will go numb and like half their tongue will like droop, and they experience like stroke like symptoms and stuff, and like really dangerous, right? And so there's lots of room for corruption that shows up in those isolated molecules, right? And this isn't to say that they're not therapeutic or healing or anything like that, like, but more importantly, is that nature is incorruptible in that sense. I feel like up until the point of where man gets involved and starts, like, I don't know
Messing
if
with
I
stuff.
yeah, I don't know if I
Fucking
can,
with stuff.
yeah,
Yeah.
I was gonna say I don't know if I can curse on this one yet.
Oh,
or
you
not.
definitely
So,
can. Yeah.
yeah, so like up until the point of where man starts fucking with everything.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And that's where corruption starts to kind of come into the creation. Whatever it is that is ongoing. If somebody has impure intentions, then that's kind of what we're looking at. But I mean, when you find a mushroom like growing,
Yeah.
like if that mushroom grew naturally and it looks healthy, that
And,
mushroom's
and you know your stuff. You do have to know your
yeah,
mushrooms.
absolutely. Right. But like, I mean, that's like a designated psilocybin mushroom, right? And it's like
Yes.
identified as knowing like
Yes.
that mushroom grew, like, and it doesn't look sickly. It doesn't look like it's struggling with bacteria or any kind of like mold or like exterior like bugs or like whatever, and it just looks like this perfect little mushroom. You eat that thing, like there's hardly any kind of negative side effect that you're going to have from like a physical reaction. I mean,
Yeah.
assuming that you're not allergic to molds or mushrooms, right?
At least not lasting. I mean, you might get nauseous or something, but at the end of the day, like you're gonna find yourself. You're gonna find some deep meaning.
Yeah, I mean, a disclaimer, like do your research, make sure you're safe if you're out there doing like forays and stuff like mushroom hunting and gathering. Like some mushrooms can and will kill you
Yeah.
the first time you eat them. Do not fuck around with nature.
Yes. I
But
think I was sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say, I think that's a really valuable distinction, though, because not only is like the manufactured isolates and distillations of these kinds of substances, it does open up for corruption. But I think also in sort of like a therapeutic and a very spiritual sense, like when you ingest a substance that came from nature or like one that you cultivated yourself, you have such a deeper and more meaningful connection to it.
Yeah.
And it just has, I feel like it's so much easier to honor it as well. And there's a really, it means so much more than if you're just going to a store and purchasing it necessarily. And I think my personally, my favorite part of the decriminalized nature movement is just the idea that you're opening up space for people to have that own access themselves so that they can, grow their own substance and then ingest it in a meaningful way, in an honorable way.
yeah, I mean, that like this is our grow gather gift model is what we call it.
Oh, yeah. Can you explain that a little more?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically just open source access, like we were talking about, like with tomatoes, basically, right?
Yeah.
Like, this doesn't necessarily like allow for people to sell, mushrooms or have. There's a word for it. I guess just yeah, I mean, just being paid for the transaction, right? Like,
Yeah.
but I think it's called remuneration. I think that's the word that I'm looking for.
new
It's
word
like
I'm gonna
payment,
use.
right? Like payment for services or goods, remuneration. So it doesn't condone like our grow gather grow gather gift model doesn't necessarily condone for that type of exchange. What we advocate for is grow gather gifting, right? So like
It's like
there's
a gifting economy.
gifting economy, but it's more connected to the community. It leaves more room for I think honest heart based giving versus setting a high value ticket or whatever for access. And the thing is that when we start looking at for instance like psilocybin, right, like being like if like when because it's going to happen, it's inevitable that the FDA eventually gets a hold of this and these types of molecules and begins producing them, and then we see the pharmaceutical like Marinol kind of thing for cannabis. But psilocybin, like synthetic psilocybin, we're looking at projected costs of like $5,000 to $10,000 a gram. A gram.
That's so stupid.
Right. So like, I mean, like anywhere from like 30 to 50 milligrams is active for an individual of like the isolated molecule that is psilocybin, right? So I mean, you're looking at, I mean, if it's like 50 milligrams, you're looking at what is that, like 200 doses within that gram, right? Something like that. But
the manufacturing costs are just so high that and it's also going to have to turn a profit in order for them to
Bottom line,
invest into it. And
yeah.
and it's so stupid because you could just grow it for, I don't know, like
Yeah,
maybe
I mean,
$100.
and the thing is absolutely. Like, I mean, the thing is that we still don't understand or fully understand the nature of the way that, for instance, like psilocybin mushrooms work or facilitate the mystical experiences that they do, because a lot of these mushrooms contain more than just psilocybin,
Yeah.
right? They contain
Like psilocin.
baeocystin, like psilocin or psilocin, I think is what you called it, like different, like tomato.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, and then like yeah, I mean, so there's many different, you know, alkaloids that come in that entourage effect, is what it's called, you know,
Yeah.
from that natural factory that is a mushroom,
Yes.
right? Like natural based factory.
And this is actually something I'm really excited to get into because, you know, with Western medicine, it's always like they try to find some sort of like site of like, I don't know, like activation, or like they essentially say, you are experiencing depression. This only helps depression because this molecule is affecting this molecule. And so they just want to say, we're just going to isolate this one molecule and give it to you. And then your depression is going to be fine now. But like you said, this ensemble effect is so much more profound. It's also like a very deeply meaningful and personal experience where it's not the actual substance that's making the difference. It's your perception, your interpretation, your personal experience of these events, at least in my experience.
Yeah, I mean, like I think that's like you know, the personal lens that we all experience our paradigms through, right? But I mean, like more to the point, like the entourage effect that I'm talking about is just like the several different you know, molecules or alkaloids that are active inside of the mushroom itself that most likely create and facilitate, you know, certain parts of the journey that that like psilocybin can't, because it
Yeah.
is an isolated molecule.
That's a good point. That is a really good point.
You know, and I think that we don't really know like fully what psilocybin being an isolated molecule is capable of. So this is like, we're not bashing it. It's just
Yeah.
like there's no established history,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like we go
We've
back
erased it.
into well, not even that. I mean, it's like we go back into you know, the history books, and we see you know, many different cultures from around the world that have utilized, you know, psilocybin mushrooms as being a sacrament, I would say,
Yeah.
for millennia.
Yeah.
So like we have co-evolved with some of these plants and fungi and cacti. I mean, like ayahuasca, I mean, is called the grandmother of all plants, right? Like, and wachuma, I mean, or peyote, like wachuma is San Pedro cactus, right? Like peyote is its own. But a lot of the American Indians and Native Americans of the North and South Americas, they understand that these medicines, that they contain certain energies, right? Like
Yeah.
divine grandmother energy, or like, you know, feminine energy, and then with ayahuasca and these types of things, or more childlike, you know, and like energy with mushrooms. They like mushrooms are also known as los niños in the Mazatec culture and things. And then like, you know, we see peyote as being the grandfather.
Interesting.
Right?
Okay.
Yeah. So there are many different reasons to you know, create you know, these types of moments for conversations and experiences for people to educate them on, like themselves on, because you know, the important parts of these medicines, I think, are found in the culture.
Oh yeah.
They're found in the traditions. They're found in the stewardship that was held for those millennia during our years and years of evolution, like co-evolution with these
Yeah.
plants and fungi and cacti. And so when we look at, you know, these clinical medical therapeutic models, I mean, sure, science is wonderful, right? Like, they're not bashing science at all, but I think it would be naive, short-sighted
Yeah.
almost to
Reductive.
to ignore, you know, these cultures that have practiced and used these medicines and plants for thousands and thousands of years without the need for a licensed medical doctor or nurse practitioner to be in the room to check your pulse every 5 to 10 minutes to make sure that you're alive. Like,
Exactly.
right? Like, it's
Just give people the freedom to experience this. And then I love how you're like very explicitly pointing out that we do need to understand and honor the cultures that have had stewardship over these substances for so long. And and this is kind of a tangent in its own, because I've heard some like of some indigenous cultures being a little nervous about like legalization or decriminalization, in that they are worried that that space will be sort of colonized. Do you know if there's any sort of
Well,
what are your thoughts on that?
yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, like, so myself personally, like, I've been accepted into the Inga lineage of the Putumayo and down in Colombia, right?
Wow.
Like, these are like a people that trace their lineage all the way back to the Incas, like in pre-Colombia and in Peruvian history, or whatever you want to call it, anthropology. And as far as the lineage that I'm associated with, and as far as the lineage like that they're like what they're concerned with, is they want to make sure that they are included in the conversation more than anything, right? Like,
Yeah.
and that there is partnership, right? Like, there is a prophecy that's known as the eagle condor prophecy, right? I can't remember who gave the prophecy, but it goes, it's something to the extent of understanding that the people of the North, like here in North America, like the people that have the eagle as their bird, right? The condor is typically found in South America and parts of the Andes, right?
Okay.
But that the people of the North have like abundance, right? Like the ability to create abundance, and the people of the South, the condor, like, right, they have medicine. And so there is an exchange that happens between the people of the North and the people of the South in order to honor the original treaties or treatises that have been created throughout the peoples and the original peoples of this planet, understanding the stewardship that we have as humans over and with, not over, but with Mother Nature, right? Because when we dip into these like extractive based models, we are actively deconstructing our relationship to nature.
Yes.
And that's very dangerous.
Yeah.
We start to kind of dip into cybernetics or Elon Musk's of the world. Like, I mean, like, again, there's nothing wrong with technology, but I think protecting some of the most ancient technologies, like, that have existed on this planet for thousands and thousands of years, that interface with our consciousness,
Yes.
in the most original metaverse that you could ever call, like, the universe,
Yeah.
right, or the cosmos in this earthly experience. But there is sacredness that is in these medicines and in these traditions and these practices that I think gets lost in like the clinical sterile models that some people have created, as a basis for commodification, to experience that palliative care within Western allopathy. And when we start to look at the relationships that these original peoples have had with these plants and fungi and cacti for thousands and thousands of years, again, right? Like, there was no need to have like a licensed like NP, like an LPN, or like an RN or an MD in the room, or to have those clinical based trials, because we co-evolved with them, and we understood set and setting, and these traditions and these cultures have protected those teachings and that wisdom for all time immemorial. And the difference is, I think, really understanding like our connection to nature, and that's I think partial to the reason why we chose Decriminalize Nature as being the organization's like title. And it's because we understand that when we reconnect and harmonize with the earth, we remember our roots, we remember our natural compassion-based stewardship over and with one another, to ensure that that we are co-creating and that we're not taking from one another, and that we're creating balance and harmony versus imbalance and destruction. And that's one of the biggest things that I think that we see in capitalism, is the disparity that comes in our communities, from people who are less than, or that don't have access, because they don't have the $250 to go and pay to Truce or Greenleaf or whatever for their medical card recommendation, and they get
recognized.
just to be allowed, right? Like, this is the major difference between like actual sovereignty, like empowering the self to educate, like with education and information, to be able to like to decide for the self, versus the mass formation psychosis that shows up for individuals who just want to be governed by the government and be told what
Yeah.
to do because they're not comfortable thinking for themselves.
Yes.
And that's dangerous,
It is,
right?
yeah.
I mean, this is what we saw throughout the entire pandemic is
Mm-hmm.
just, I mean, the masks, like the vaccines, like, and like whatever you chose, right? Does not matter to me. It matters only to you and your
Mm-hmm.
creator, between you and like you and your creator, you know, and
It's just
like
this fear-based reaction and kind of a like an
manipulation,
outsource of your
control.
sovereignty, like
Yeah.
you're saying.
Like, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was just gonna say, I really love that, especially the focus on kind of the communing with nature and the unification with nature, and that focus there specifically because like these substances are just so good at doing that anyways. They're so good at helping you understand how you are fundamentally a part of nature and you are
Yeah.
fundamentally a part of everything else. And so like where our culture and our society is really trying our best, or I want to say we're trying our best to,
Some of us.
yeah, right. Some of us are trying our best to make changes in the climate and trying to like reshape our ecology and reinvest ourselves back into the world and understand that we are a part of the world, and just combating climate change in general. I feel like these substances can be a very integral part of that because of the way it helps us remember how we are nature and how we are fundamentally a part of nature and how we have to work with it and understand that taking care of nature is taking care of ourselves as well. And so I really like that you brought that up.
Yeah, I mean, and like just to kind of present, I guess, like the slogan or mantra of
Yeah.
decriminalize nature, right? It's like it's remembering our roots,
Ooh, yeah.
right? Like, and that's the thing is that like when we dip into capitalism and that extractive based nature of our reality and we start taking from one another, we like we lose compassion. And
Yes.
you know, Joe down the street that like, you know, struggles with a heroin addiction and is homeless or unsheltered and wants to get off the drugs but can't because he doesn't have the ability to, from, you know, the red tape or the clinical pathways or whatever, insurance, you know, all these things. This is where we offer what we like to call the community-based ceremonial model, right? Where it's
love
like
this.
part of this grow, gather, gift, you know, society and culture where we understand and recognize that everybody deserves healing, right? And healing, like I still have a problem with paying for healthcare. Like even if it's from, you know, IHC or whatever, like even if I have a cold, and that's really just based like out of, I think, you know, my understanding of the Hippocratic Oath.
Yeah.
And understanding that doctors and people who serve in that medical profession, that it is a responsibility and an honor to serve the other in helping them, you know, find their healing and helping that individual create their own healing, right?
Yeah.
And this is a major, you know, differentiation, I think, between Western allopathy and some of these more indigenous teachings that surround these plant medicines specifically. And that is, you know, basically giving my power away to an external entity to heal me versus me realizing how to heal myself.
Yeah.
Right. And this is a lot of what, you know, these plants and these fungi, cacti create is a very deep, profound introspection of self, you know, that we can self-identify with our own ailments, our own dis-ease, right? That manifests in the body. And depending upon what lineage you work with, like real lineage, there are some lineages that are out there that are just charlatan, you know, like they just want to capitalize off the ayahuasca tourism.
Yeah.
And you see a lot of that in Peru and certain places,
So unfortunate.
you know, but yeah, I mean, to some extent, you know, but like also like, I think a lot of it really just kind of comes down to personal identification with the self, right? And like, I think if the individual is really looking for, you know, something pure, they'll find it. I mean, that's like, that's part of the intention-based reality that I think that we live in and how we manifest our worlds,
Yeah.
right? Like through just from experience and progressing. But yeah, you know, it's very important to maintain and it, like that personal sense of empowerment, right? And that's like, that's the other piece that we kind of advocate for, is that there is a major delineation between the decriminalized nature approach to fundamentals, like the fundamentals of society, versus the current societal approach, and how like how people base their experience of reality. You know, I mean, whether it's you know, within their ego. Decriminalized nature is more like open sourced, where the current societal approach is exclusive,
Privatized.
like privatized,
Mm-hmm.
right? You know, looking at like different like aspects of education and these types of frameworks, like right, like we advocate for open source education, where you know, if people want to educate themselves, they can educate themselves and feel free in that empowerment, right? And finding that sovereignty versus, you know, having to consistently subvert their power to a medical professional or licensed professional, where in reality, like there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
And we as an organization don't see anything wrong with people who want to go the therapeutic route. But it's important to understand that 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 these people aren't healing you. You know, you're healing yourself through personal empowerment and education and information and choosing for yourself. And that is a lot of what these plants teach and these medicines teach, just from the experience themselves.
Yeah.
Right. So there's so much that I think really that like the decriminalization of these plants and these fungi and cacti does for our communities in helping them to not only reintegrate into our societies, but be cared for and stewarded with, as we have, you know, in growing the traditions and the cultural lineages that have held these medicines as being sacred, and understanding that there are individuals out there that have gone and done the work and been, you know, spoken with the elders and been given rites of initiation and the rites of passage to carry these medicines and not just be, you know, somebody who's just taking,
Yes.
and then, you know, suffering themselves gladly, and then, you know, on the back end, you know, touting all the wisdom that they found, which, I mean, again, there's nothing wrong with that. That is personal experience gained, earned, and, you know, developed within the self. But I think there's something that is to be said about some of these lineages that have worked with, say, like ayahuasca for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, that
Yeah.
like it goes back as far as they can imagine with their mind's eye, and understanding that their ancestors worked with this medicine, that like that are most likely, like there's a meme that I saw, like it was like probably a couple of months ago, but it flashes every now and then on like throughout Facebook or social media, and it says something to the extent of you are the
The universe experiencing itself through
no,
you.
but like I think what did it say? Like it was you are your ancestors' prayer,
Ooh.
like what they were praying for, what they were singing for, what they were dancing for, in recognizing that, you know, before we experienced, you know, the age of industry and the industrial revolution and all of those things, that there was a much simpler task to life, and that was just living. That was being in sustainability and in harmony with nature. And then it became, you know, hop on the hamster wheel and feed Uncle Sam, so that we can power these bottom line corporations and industry. And then, oh, hold on, wait, we're gonna have like a 20-year long war in Iraq, and then and
It's
then
just
not
seeming
give.
to go right down the drain
Well, yeah,
over and
but
over.
to me, like this is a functioning of the universe, right? Like this is what the medicine would tell me. Like, is that I'm just here to witness, right? Like I'm not here to control. And there is a catalyst that is delivered from these experiences to the world, that helps people, I think, in their deeper introspection with identifying with their own truth surrounding a lot of these atrocities, like the war in Ukraine, for instance, right? Like that absolute rubbish that is happening over there, that is like, like why, you know, and people start to recognize, like, wait, like hold on a minute, like I can talk to God on mushrooms, right? And then you start to like have this numinous mystical experience, and you start to recognize, like, whoa, like you're my brother, like, you know, I mean, we
Why
may
am I
not
finding
share
it?
like blood or genetics in that sense, you know, or like,
But we're all connected.
but we are all connected, right? And that was one of the most powerful experiences that I've had from plant medicine, and is dissolving that barrier of self, and recognizing that consciousness just is.
Yeah.
This experience that we're experiencing is just maybe just like a glimpse into like the imagination of some kid with a magnifying glass on some
Yeah.
alien's world, that's just like, you know, like whoa, who knows, right? Like
I love that.
it's wild.
I think
And
that's so valuable, and I feel like that is why these substances are so needed, and like these experiences are so needed in order for like all of humanity to just transcend all the bullshit that we're experiencing right now. Like we really do just need to awaken to the fact that we are all connected, that we are all each other's brothers, and that we can actually work together to create a world that is better for all of us and better for the ecology, and just making sure that everything has more meaning to it.
Yeah.
And I'd love to shift gears right here to kind of to talk about the legislative roadblocks that we're facing right now, because I mean, you and I are very clearly on the same page. This is so valuable. This is so needed. But what are the roadblocks that are stopping us from like actually decriminalizing this, from actually making it happen right now? And how do we overcome those?
Yeah, I mean, that's really good questions. In reality, like I mean, just like speaking for here in Utah, like we've made, very significant strides in a state, a very red state, that I would have never imagined. Some of the officials that I've been speaking with would have been as receptive as they are.
Really? That's so good to hear.
Yeah, it's wonderful, right? I've experienced miracle after miracle after miracle, speaking with some of these representatives and understanding that these people just want to be educated. That's all they want. They just want to be educated. And there was like, I'm not gonna lie, like there was this like hidden shadow in my psyche that was like, these people are my enemies.
Yeah.
Right. Like I can't trust these people.
Yeah.
Right. And so it
You almost
creates
felt
like
combative.
argumentative, where it's like I have to prove a point.
Yeah.
And, when one really starts to kind of settle into this work, we start to realize like I don't have anything to prove. Like this is
Speaks for
like,
itself.
this is truth. Right. Like look at the science, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
Johns Hopkins, like all of these different research and journal entries and articles that have been created specifically for these purposes of enlightenment and illumination for people who say trust the science.
Yeah.
Right. It was funny. I was at a conference this like a couple of weeks ago here in Salt Lake City that we did down at the Leonardo. It was called the Rising Consciousness Conference. Shout out to anybody who attended that. But it was really fascinating to see some of these research-based scientists that are talking about microdosing and all of these things and palliative care and how we address depression and all these things, and some of these wisdom keepers and carriers that are elders is what I would consider. They kind of laugh and chuckle to themselves on stage, saying, "Oh, you guys are catching up."
Yeah.
Like said it on stage. It was
finally
hilarious.
figuring it out.
The entire crowd laughed. It was like, yeah, and just recognizing that like science is trying to define spirit. I think more importantly, like that's
so hard to do.
Well, yeah, I mean, but like look at Galileo, right? Like I mean, like even like Giordano Bruno, right? Like some of these iconic figures in history that that understood, the nature of reality far beyond everybody else, and then got labeled heretics and criminals, and then locked away in their house, like their houses for being Galileo, or burned at the stake. Giordano Bruno was burned at the stake for being like a hermetic, like a hermeticist.
Speaking truth.
Yeah, I mean, like speaking truth. And so like some of these plants, like they and just the medicines that are around them, they speak for themselves. And I think the biggest challenge that our elected officials have faced is breaking down their own paradigms. And I mean, specifically here in Utah, I think we are a very diverse political climate, considering the church and the LDS Mormon Church and their role that they have, the influence that they have here in the state. They are good people. Like Mormons are good people. But I think that they hide themselves from certain aspects of reality until, like, say, science has proved it, right?
Yeah.
It's like so weird, right?
Yeah.
Like,
And they're like mired by their preconceptions of it, and they're just like really locking onto those, and it's very fear-based too.
So I personally try not to like attach to that like model and like in like of seeking and thinking that these people are going to be adverse to being educated or not wanting to be educated, when in reality, I mean, I spoke with Eric Hutchings, me and my associate spoke with Eric Hutchings. He's a longtime legislator, I guess, not only in the state of Utah, but he's also done national legislation and things, who's based in criminal reform and all these things. And he's the county mayor's, like chief strategist, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
He was so receptive to the conversation, just being like, "Look, man, I think it was funny because he was kind of picking up on that just like excitement that's in my voice when
Yeah.
I talk with these elected officials, and he's like,
Yeah.
"I'm not your enemy," like kind of basically just said it out in like this flat out like frank way, and I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
that like thank you,
Yeah.
like I see you,
Mm-hmm.
and I said that to him, like, and just kind of recognized that like I'm not your enemy either. This is just my
Mm.
excitement. The fact that like I even get to like have these conversations with you guys is
Yeah.
just mind blowing.
Honestly, that makes me so happy. That makes me like, it just makes it feel like it's not insurmountable because,
Yeah.
and I've also found a very similar situation in my own life at specifically like trying, just opening up and communicating and like educating specifically LDS people about this. And what I've found is like they actually tend to be very intrigued and interested, especially when I let them know that like it actually reignited a belief in God. It reignited my spirituality.
Yeah.
And they are often so interested in that, especially if they knew me like as I left the LDS church and became like atheist and nihilistic and things
Mm-hmm.
like that. And then I directly attribute like my reinvigoration of life and my love for life to psilocybin and to these plants and substances, and they're always so interested because they're like, wait, what? Like, what do you mean? This is just like a party drug. This is just what the hippies do. And it's like, no,
Welcome to
this,
the propaganda that you bought
yes,
and
exactly. And just,
deposited.
and I think I love that you point out that in the end, at the end of the day, people aren't really trying to be combative. They're just kind of, they've got their own presuppositions that they're kind
Ignorance
of,
is
yeah,
bliss.
exactly. But then I think once they see your truth, your honesty, and how open you are about your experiences with it, they're kind of like, wait, what?
Yeah, I mean, like, it's a fascinating, paradox that I think occurs because, in reality, for me personally, I have had nothing but spiritual experiences with plant medicine,
Mm-hmm.
and fungi or cacti, um, and I mean, when you go into the Bible, it talks about all seed-bearing plants were given to mankind for the benefit of mankind, or something like
Mm-hmm.
that. I forget the verse and like how it's actually given, but something similar to that effect. And
Yeah.
um, you start to kind of see that these plants and these, I mean, that's where all medicine is derived from, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is a lot of plants and fungi, and understanding, the pharmacies that are found in these plants and things, but um, naivety is dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
Apathy is dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
Apathy being, just not caring, like verge of nihilism, right?
Yeah.
And I think that this is where a lot of people unknowingly live.
Mm-hmm.
It's they have been satiated by capitalism, been
Mm-hmm.
satiated by
Religion,
religion, and
dogma.
being, yeah, dogma, being told that you need to have 5 kids and a wife, or 5 wives and a kid,
Yeah.
like whatever that looks like. And then just continuing that, just putting another cog on the wheel, just another
Mm-hmm.
cog on the wheel.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, here's a secret for you, and for any LDS or Latter Day Saints that are listening to this. Like, I encourage and invite you to look into Joseph Smith's use of psilocybin mushrooms.
What? This is news to me right
This is
now.
real. Like,
I'm very excited about
you
this
can
right now.
find an article. Like, I have it on my Reddit somewhere. I'll find it and I'll send it to you.
Perfect.
I actually posted the article on the Salt Lake City. I think it was the LDS Church's Reddit, like subreddit,
Mm-hmm.
and I got banned instantly banned. Banhammer hit me hard, and then like I never got any kind of response. Like I
Oh.
reached out to them, like their moderators, and was like,
Mm-hmm. It's like, did you even read it?
yeah, did you guys even like look into the article, or like see how this came out of your guys' archives, like the
Oh my
LDS
lord.
archives? And basically, what is it? It's a story about like how Joseph Smith dove into just about every single like occult, religion, spiritual, secret society, whatever it is that you could think of, from Europe to Egypt to everything, and
Mm-hmm.
studied all of it, and then all of a sudden, Mormonism came about.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was because he had found what, like the golden plates in a
Mm-hmm.
log and somewhere in the woods, and
Hill Kimura or something like
Yeah,
that.
I don't know how you experience that without eating mushrooms.
Yeah, right.
Like that's just, I think that's just
What is
that's,
divine revelation without these
yeah.
substances?
Well, meditation and breath work,
Yes,
truly,
that's true. That's true.
truly, but that's the thing is that when we look at some of the ideologies that are prescribed to us and that we position ourselves with in ignorance and in naivety, we can kind of start to see that paradox or that canceling effect of the self, where it's like cognitive dissonance, or like, wait, like something's not computing correctly, and you can kind of like recognize that like, I mean, when with education, with empowerment, um, people can let go of their fear. In many indigenous cultures, this is called witiko. Like witiko is the illness that is fear that infects a being, and it creates doubt. It creates, like negative energy, shame, guilt, all these things that cloud and surround somebody. And when it comes down to, for instance, like being in a red state that is the LDS Church's headquarters, I don't know how they could really fight us with having such a like a spiritual claim
Yeah.
and experience with these entheogens. I mean, the word itself, right, entheogen, and that's why we designate the word being entheogen and not psychedelic, is
Yeah.
because entheogen means the divine from within, right? Like to inspire or create the divine from within, versus
Yeah.
where psychedelic is, I think, to create just from within. I think from within the psyche and from within the mind.
Oh, okay. I see.
And like there's a major delineation between like the usage and the
The
like
etymology.
etymology, right? And that's very important, right? Because I mean, language creates our world. Like it is
Yeah.
what defines our reality, and especially like, for instance, like when drawing up a bill, right? Like for instance, like House Bill 167 that was introduced in January of 2022 for
It was like the task force.
yeah,
Is
this
that what it
like
was?
psychedelic drug task force for the state of Utah, right? Like, essentially, it seems to be, I just lost my train of thought.
It seems like it's just very like investigative, and it's not necessarily. I think I can see where you're going with kind of the point that it's trying to write down something that is so profound and so beyond words.
I know where I was going. Like, yeah. So I mean, so like with the language, right? Like, because when you write a language, like in House Bill 167, right, it talks about psychotherapeutic drug, right? That's the language that's put into the bill.
Interesting.
Versus where, like, why not just call it an entheogen? Why not just
Yeah.
call it psychedelics,
A
right?
substance, a plant.
Yeah, like, and a natural medicine, right? Like, call it what it is.
Yeah.
And you can see this, like, this is like kind of the formation of the opportunity for them, like them being the state, or so like certain lobbyist groups that are very deeply embedded with the
Private
state,
interests.
private interests, that want to come in and try to maybe commodify it,
Yeah.
right? Like, look at cannabis and the way that cannabis progressed here in Utah.
Yeah.
And from what I've heard, just from the backroom chatters and through the grapevine, we'll say, is that this is the state of Utah's attempt to kind of create like an umbrella over all psychotropic, psychotherapeutic drugs and medicines. So like cannabis included, like opiates included, psilocybin included, DMT included, so that I had a friend, she called it what it is, a cartel.
Yeah. Essentially.
Right. And when she said that, it really hit. I was like, damn, I'm going to take that and just
Yeah.
like write that down. Like, the state of Utah is creating like a cartel, and
It's just setting a precedent, and it's just literally lining up the red carpet for this.
yeah. And I don't say that to kind of
story.
create enemies at all, like, because I know that, like many different people will end up like, ultimately listening to this, and hopefully they do. But it's just to kind of set like a certain awareness within the consciousness and how we organize ourselves around these medicines as being a community, because
Yeah.
ultimately it comes down to education.
Yes.
Right, just educating yourself around how these medicines were created and why they were created, why they were stewarded in the way that they have been for thousands and thousands of years, and then not adulterating them, not distorting them with new age philosophies or thinkings. And I think that is, that's just part of it. And that's why decriminalization is so important, into making sure that that when we talk about entheogens, we're talking about plants, we're talking about fungi, we're talking about cacti, we're not talking about synthetic psilocybin, right? When people talk about psychedelics, I could be talking about LSD, I could be talking
Yeah.
about ketamine, I could be talking about MDMA,
DMT,
right?
anything,
And that leads into issues of purity, and that leads into issues of like access and equitability and all these things. But yeah, like the state of Utah is an interesting place, and I guess I can touch on the national conversation briefly. Is that as an organization, Decriminalize Nature, we've had many different conversations with the NAC and like the National Council for Native American Churches. Surrounding peyote specifically, we're very deeply connected to the Huichol people and the Huichurita people of northern Mexico. And they have entirely different views, right? Like the Huichol people of northern Mexico are some of the oldest stewards over peyote, for instance, right? Like specifically peyote. And peyote has been kind of one of the more controversial plants, fungi, cacti, in question over the last couple of years because of the Native American or American Indian population and their rights of access that was given to them by the American government, and the Peyote Act that happened in I think in like 1903 or 4 or something like that. And as we progress this conversation, and this is kind of like parallel to what we're trying to do and accomplish here in Utah, is that like there are two sets to this, right? There is the clinical therapeutic model that is inevitable, and then there is the spiritual community-based ceremonial model and personal sacrament use, right? And this is kind of in the similar alignment with how the Native American and American Indians, you know, see or treated or utilized peyote from that legal sense and the framework of the United States government, right? All the bureaucracy and red tape that's in that. And here in Utah, we're kind of like, there was like ONAC, right? Like there is ONAC, ONAC being Oclaveja Native American Church.
Oh, okay.
Created by James Mooney. He's a very interesting, fascinating human. Got a lot of love for him. What I would say is that like back in 2003, he and his partner ONAC also was prosecuted by the state of Utah for having like something like over like 20,000 peyote buttons in their possession.
Wow.
And essentially, they won their prosecution against the state of Utah, and were given rights of access to all non-native members and native members. So basically, you just have to have a membership to ONAC to have experiences with peyote under a legal setting. And then I think like in recent years, he has attempted or has, I'm not sure if he's completed this and how legitimate it is, and people can do their own research on this, but I think he's added ayahuasca and psilocybin and like iboga into that list as far as like use of access under certain church structures for like under ONAC. Because ONAC is just like an umbrella, and so this is kind of like queuing up the points, like the different points between understanding like this religion, spirituality based approach, and also having like some of these side prongs is understanding like a true sovereign approach, and knowing that we are all indigenous to this earth, we are all part of this earth. And this isn't to like erase or eradicate any of the indigenous cultures or populations, but it is I think the acquiescence of self in the moment, and recognizing that we are all here now,
Yeah.
right? And that we all deserve access to these medicines, and that the stewards were and have been stewards for thousands of years, and that they've been like now opened up to being given back, but to what extent, right? Like, do I have to go and file with the IRS like a 501c6 or whatever to have a church, like
An
and
organization that
yeah,
gets through the little red tape
yeah,
and
like
all
jump
that
through
stuff.
all your hoops, right?
And it's amazing to me that you can outline so many different experiences of how this has happened and how this has worked, and yet we do still have these bullshit red tape, this bullshit like hoops that we need to jump through, when at the end of the day it should be. I mean, I have just this fundamental belief that the state like should not have any say on what I put in my body at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, agreed, and that is part of the sovereignty, piece that I really believe in. but I think also that, you know, there is a need for, um, I think to some extent, some oversight.
Mm-hmm.
And this is still like a very sensitive, kind of delicate subject for me, where I'm like, I'm still kind of trying to find my polarity in it.
Yeah.
But I think at the end of the day, it's like, what do we do with bad actors,
Yep.
right? And I think the conversation has kind of evolved into this point of understanding that, you know, the plants themselves, the fungi themselves, the cacti themselves should never be criminalized.
Yes.
The access, the use, the growth, the you know, holding or like having in possession of
We
should
should-
never be criminalized.
We should no longer put people in a cage for getting these substances.
Yeah, or using them for their own personal selves, right?
Yeah.
That the moment that we have a bad actor, right, that rapes somebody or has some sort of sexual misconduct or overdoses these people or has like some negative like, you know, just like contraindication that they didn't pay attention to, and there's like
manipulates.
negligence, right?
Okay.
What do we do with those people, right? How do we curb that? And I think that that's where, you know, in the conversations that we've had with like the county council and like Eric Hutchings, being like the strategist for the county and like the county mayor, is that, like, you know, like if Steve or Bobby, we'll call him Bobby, right? Like if Bobby down the street, you know, decides to eat mushrooms, and has his own personal experience in his basement, has a psychotic break because he had underlying mental health like issues that were undiagnosed, and he, you know, decides to flock naked throughout the neighborhood, right? I mean, he should probably be, you know, cited for obscenity and indecency.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
Yeah.
I think that's legitimate.
I think that's the distinction there, is like we already have the laws
Yeah.
to handle those situations that we are saying that the mushrooms or the plants and the fungi and the cacti are allegedly creating. Like we already, like if someone rapes somebody, we already have laws that dictate what to do to that with that person.
Yeah.
If someone murders someone, and like and trying to use that as like justification for banning a substance just seems so off base to me.
Well, I think really what it is it's the nailing of you to the cross, right? Because we want to make sure that you don't do this again. This is
Yeah.
the drug war, right? When really what it is just it's a war on personal freedom. It's not a war on drugs.
Yes.
It's a war on consciousness, because the government does not trust us to make the right decisions, because we've obviously, well, in their eyes, we have somehow proven that we're not worthy of making our own decisions and our own choices. They've just kind of taken the power and ran with it, right? When in reality, a democracy is a democracy is a democracy. Like the people can like have the command over what is within the community.
I always say we hold all the power all the time.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You know, so I think it just becomes the point of, you know, decriminalization becomes, you know, having the framework and the access for healthy education and information so that people can educate themselves, so they can make the empowered decisions, so that they're not living in, you know, fear of being prosecuted or whatever. And that's the thing, is that the extra charge that comes along with, you know, Bobby running down the street naked and eating mushrooms, of eating mushrooms. That's just their way of continuing that fear-based model and mentality of taking our power away and saying that, see, Bobby did it again.
Yeah, exactly. It's a way of continuing their control over us as well. I think that's such a valid point, and I appreciate you bringing up the idea of like, let's say we do get decriminalization, like how do we deal with these bad actors? And I think the main thing to focus on in those situations is that by empowering people to have that access and education, and by prioritizing that education, that's going to be the main way to make sure that those bad actors aren't really, you know, coming up. I mean, if you essentially fully legalize it and, you know, make it so that anybody can walk in and take these substances with no understanding, no education, no real
bad things are going to happen.
Yes, exactly. But it sounds like the decriminalization like framework is solely based on let's educate, let's open access, and let's make sure that people are actually going to be able to use these substances in a way that is fully beneficial to them.
Yeah, I mean, and just kind of like, because you said that, like Decriminalize Nature as an organization, as a national bodied organization, we've come together and created like a 7-step process of building a safe, healthy, and responsible approach to use in
Yes.
an urban community, like
Yes.
use in an urban community. And those 7 steps are like information being first and foremost, number 1. Number 2, education, and then in 3 is preparation. 4 is application. And then it goes integration, implementation, and the last step is reciprocity.
Oh, that's
Like,
so good.
right? Like recognizing that
I love
there
that.
is like a flow chart almost to this, to where people can have safe, healthy, responsible access to these plants, to where they're not putting themselves in harm's way. The very fact that these medicines are criminalized creates a shadow in which people who actually have the information can't openly come out and advertise, because their fear of being, prosecuted or
Yep.
criminalized and having their lives ruined, like Bobby. Just kidding.
Which-
Bobby didn't ruin his life. He had a mental health break.
And sorry to interject, but like that's honestly why I value you and value your work so very much, because it really is a shadowed space right now where
Yeah.
people are afraid to stand up, and it's so needed because these substances are so vitally important to our emotional, social, and spiritual well-being.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so ultimately, just kind of, closing off on the picture of the state and national and how we're moving forward is really, creating that empowerment piece, and what it looks like honestly right now in working with our local officials here for the state of Utah, is very promising. I mean, we've had like Ann Granado is our county councilwoman here currently for at least my district here, and I'm her constituent. Uh, she's given us a yes. Like, we
Nice.
support like where you're coming from with all this, like a full-bodied yes, which was epic to receive.
Awesome.
And then the following day, we met with Representative Brian King, who is a representative of the House of Representatives for the state of Utah. I'm also his constituent, thank God. And he was like one of also like the most receptive that we've met with, and just being like, yeah, like let's do this and let's do it right, and understanding that there is a coalition-based approach to this. The medical clinical model, and then the community-based ceremonial model. That's the coalition. And recognizing the importance of both, and not leaving out the decrim piece or the language for those, because without the decrim language, it becomes commodification. It becomes that process for venture capital to come in, for the Dr. Bronners of the world, the new approaches to come into the world. Like, the New Approach PAC is the lobbyist group that has pretty much pushed every single cannabis legislation and recreational like state program through the governments in the states that have, and provided hundreds of thousands of dollars towards the initiatives to basically write these bills and support their bills the way that they see them, versus actually like caring for the indigenous steward aspect of like what Decrim Nature's ethos is. And so I honestly I feel like the future looks very promising for
so
plant
glad.
medicine.
so
Yeah,
glad.
it's odd, like I'm like excited, but I'm still kind of like in that
Like a doubtful space.
not doubtful at all, like
good.
just not ready to celebrate yet.
Oh, that makes sense.
Like, like
just apprehensive.
not even apprehensive. It's just like careful, like not cautious, but careful,
Yeah.
right? Like,
That's needed.
Yeah.
It really is. Because, there is a lot of baggage that we're having to tiptoe around and having to wade through, really.
Yeah.
And I think that's very warranted. So it makes sense.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, in the future, what it looks like, honestly, is like, we're looking to create like a docu-series for the Decrim Nature team specifically, to where we can kind of feature, specific aspects of individuals' like healing journeys, whether it's through depression or ADHD or, being like a mental health issue, or even if it's just looking at cognitive liberty and wanting to expand your consciousness, and kind of grow more deeply into yourself and into the universe and the experience that is this, whatever this is, simulation, who knows, so, that, and then creating harm reduction models. Like that's really going to be the deepening of this over the long run, is how do we educate and create harm reduction for our community, to ensure that we are caring in the most compassionate, loving, aware, conscious way that is grounded, and that we're not just looking to grow a bottom line.
Yeah.
And that's really kind of what it boils down to. And I honestly think that we have a real shot at creating that, creating that balanced model, because otherwise, I mean, like, we're going to see things like Tom Eckert happen. Tom Eckert being like he was the chairman of the board for the psilocybin therapy program up in Oregon. He also had his hands in the company that I think the state of Oregon chose to be the training facility and everything for all the therapists and
Yeah.
facilitators, right?
Sort
And
of.
so he was basically like lining his pockets.
Uh-huh.
Like, here, let me just like carve out this niche in my market, in my industry
Yeah.
real quick. And then when he got called out on his conflicts of interest, he resigned from the board and from the chair of the state program, and it became very readily apparent that corruption does exist in our government, and that there are conflicts
and
of
it's actually
interest.
rewarded very often.
Yeah,
Unfortunately.
well, yeah, in a kind of roundabout way, and so that's kind of just what we want to protect against, and
Awesome.
that's what it really kind of looks like. So.
That's so important. I'm really glad to hear that, because I mean, specifically that decriminalization is not the end. Like it's not just like, oh yeah, once we decriminalize these substances, everything's going to be better. It's all about that harm reduction model and making sure that people are actually utilizing this in a very meaningful and valuable way, so that we can actually make very meaningful systemic change in our lives and in our culture.
Yeah, in our world, for sure.
Awesome. So to kind of just finish this out, I wanted to, like see if there's anything that any of our listeners can do to make sure that they can aid and assist in this, because I know a lot of people who really do find entheogenic plants, fungi, and cacti to be very, very valuable to them, and are either just afraid to speak up or really don't know what to do in order to make meaningful change and meaningful impacts. So, what are some things that people can do in order to really get this movement where we want it to be?
Yeah, absolutely. As like just for the state of Utah, reach out to our organization, send us an email, info@decriminalizeslc.org. Or show up to our meetings. We have monthly meetings, depending on the location. Sometimes it's down here in Salt Lake. Sometimes it's in like the Provo area.
Okay.
But we are looking for more involvement from our community. At this point, our organization has transitioned to the state level organization. We are no longer just Decriminalize SLC. We are Decriminalize Nature Utah.
Yes.
And so ultimately, what we are looking for are for individuals in each of the districts throughout the counties, to kind of show up and start to make their voice known. What I can tell you is that there's honestly nothing to be afraid of. Like, there's nothing illegal about information or education. And I think that's one of the most important things to share, and understanding and inviting people into this space, is that if you're speaking from past experience, there's not really an ability for them to prosecute you. So if you're sharing testimony about how these things changed your life for the better, I think that they'd be hard pressed to prosecute you for that, as long as you weren't like a bad actor, or had exterior or like ulterior motives and things. But aside from that, like, I would say, to get involved is to understand, like, state politics, and I guess like how it runs. Session starts in January of every year, closes in March.
Okay.
And then pretty much the rest of the year is spent in administrative, managerial duties amongst the staff members throughout the state of Utah and the different municipalities, and handling, resolutions and initiatives and House bills and Senate bills and things. But ultimately, like, when January comes around, again, we're going to need people to share their testimony to the committees that are, necessary for when we draft these bills. Like I mentioned, like, we are looking at drafting two different bills, and in that process, you know, we're going to need testimony from our community to come out and speak to the importance of both sides of this, and that also looks very similar at the municipal level. So to get involved at the municipal level, like I said, you can reach out to myself directly at the organization through that email, and we can get you all of the documents and supportive texts so that you can bring yourself into alignment with this material, and then you know, start advocating for your own district, your own city, your own municipality. And that really honestly just looks like going to the city or county council meetings, depending on what level you're advocating for, and making sure that you're advocating and not being like an activist. Like
Yeah.
activists throw Molotov cocktails, advocates don't. We push legislation. Kind of a funny little zinger there. But yeah, you know, like really getting involved and just going and sitting down, like and taking a minute to sit at the county council meetings is like a fascinating experience.
Yeah.
It's like, what is this? This is like
Just appreciating like what all has to happen in order for
just
change
these
to be
ancient
made.
forums that are now
Yeah.
modernized, you know,
Yeah.
and so it kind of, it's like an experience in and of itself. And if you're really passionate about this work, I think it'll be something that really kind of turns you on, because you can see the process of how this happens. And then really getting involved just looks like recognizing who your representative is, like for the county or the city council, or, you know, the representative state level. There are websites for the state of Utah, or on the state of Utah website, that you can, you know, get in touch with your representatives, and you know, I mean, essentially send them emails. We have an email template and structure that's been built out for our constituents here in Utah that contains a vast amount of research and studies that have been, you know, compiled for this purpose of sending to our representatives to say, hey, like, you know, go through all this information and educate yourself. And just so you know, like, I'm an advocate.
Awesome.
You know, I could testify around this. So there's a lot that people can do to involve, but I think that's like kind of the basics of it, is like, you know, reach out to the organization, send us an email, get involved, show that you care, and you know,
Build this movement.
yeah, everybody determines their own level of involvement.
Yeah.
Project Mayhem.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to meet with me
Yeah.
today, Dimitri. This has been extremely valuable to me, and I really hope that this is valuable for you. And I hope that we can really make some big strides and changes here, because I know it's just been so very, very important and valuable in my own life. And so I know I need to be an advocate as well. So appreciate your time.
Yeah, love you. Thank you so much for having me
Awesome.
on, and looking forward to maybe one more in the future. or
Oh,
something.
definitely. Yeah. And now I have you on the mic for that. So you now have to do it. That's
Excellent.
perfect.
Thank you so much.